I actually found a reading that Liz did, and I liked it because on the CaringBridge site, Dick Gilbert wrote a note about how when people called this the Unitarian Church, he and Liz both would chime in Universalist because they were both of a Universalist heritage. So here's a little a chalice lighting that Liz wrote. It's called a UU Heritage Chalice Lighting. Our Unitarian heritage bids us light our chalice in the name of freedom, in the light of reason, in the action of tolerance. We gather in community to celebrate a heritage of freedom, reason, and tolerance. Our Universalist heritage bids us light our chalice in the name of faith, in the light of hope, in actions of love. We gather in community to celebrate a heritage of faith, hope, and love. Let us bring this Unitarian Universalist heritage into our world and into our lives today. So Jean, I invite you to go ahead and speak. We are so happy to have you here this morning. Whoops, I am not hearing you for some reason. Jean, I can't hear you.
Oh, they muted me again.
That's better. Okay.
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank you for giving this opportunity to us to get to know each other, to review and reflect on our lives, to share what we've learned on the way, and to remember family, friends, and teachers who helped us and who gave meaning to our lives. I was reluctant to do it, but now I'm glad I did for those very reasons. I think this is somewhat like an NPR fund drive. You listen, and enjoy, and then it's time for you to step up and contribute. So that's what I'm doing this morning. I grew up in Rockville Center. That's spelled with an R-E, not an E-R, on the South Shore of Long Island, 45 minutes from Broadway, which we felt was a very special place and had the advantages of both city and country. In the city, theaters, art museums, historic sites like Little Italy, Chinatown, Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, the Battery. All of these were available to us, all the museums. I did say that, good. And the country was safe with unlocked homes, neighborhoods where everybody knew your name, and open areas to play, and access to the beaches. The beaches were a very important part of our lives, as our dermatologists would acknowledge. But it was not without its problems. As a young child, I was aware of economic inequities and racial prejudice. My family consisted of an older sister, Doris, from whom I learned how I didn't want to be, and a younger brother, Jim. And my mother and my father, who was a sea captain. He was away from home a lot, especially when we were really young, 6 months. And then as we got older, 3 months at a time. He was not, however, an absent father. He was very much an important and critical part of our lives. Because our family was different than most of the families at the time, the bonds were unusually strong and therefore difficult to break during teenage years. My mother was imaginative in making my father a part of our lives. We once kept a Christmas tree up till March so my father could see it. As a child, I didn't realize how it looked, but I think it probably looked like one of Charlie Brown's leftovers. My mother was, oh, I said that. Oh, no, I didn't. Her attitude gave us direction, hope, and belief, but it also created a fantasy world where things were supposed to be. My mother was responsible for our family life, and now I realize how overwhelming this must have been for her at times. Her own fears and insecurities probably accounted for her inflexibility during our teenage years. However, my mother, despite these problems, was a role model for adaptability, compassion, lack of prejudice, determination, and courage. From my father came a curiosity about life, a love of learning, a desire to explore, a sense of joy in being a woman. He once said he envied women childbirth. Our extended family, grandparents, and aunts and uncles were very important to us and lived nearby. In fact, my grandparents lived next to each other. Dad had married the girl next door. I didn't like being a middle child. It seemed a no-win situation. Doris received attention because she was the oldest, and Jim because he was the youngest. I felt I was assigned a role in the family in which they underestimated both my intelligence and my sensitivity. The situation was compounded by undiagnosed and unheard of at the time dyslexia. Luckily, I chose a life partner who saw my potential. We were members of the Unitarian Methodist Church, and Jim and I would walk each Sunday to Sunday school, which was about 1.5 miles away. I have always been grateful to the Methodist Church for teaching me about the Bible, and especially the lessons of the New Testament. I remember a picture hanging on the wall of Jesus surrounded by children of all colors, and the saying, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." I sang in the choir, made my confirmation, even though I really didn't understand about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But then, what's not to like about confirmation? A new dress, a corsage, presents, attention. But around 14 or 15, I became disillusioned. Where were those children in our congregation? Why did we have missionaries? Why did people make jokes about Blacks and Jews? In short, I felt that Methodists were hypocrites. Our school system was excellent from kindergarten to graduation. There were 4 elementary schools: Clinton, Morris, Hewitt, and Wilson. I went to Morris School, Sterling went to Wilson, but our experiences were very similar. We could walk, skate, or bike to school and come home for lunch. We had regularly scheduled arts and crafts, music, plays, physical education, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. We were, however, still in a depression. And a box of Crayola crayons was a coveted item. Bats and balls were scarce. We spent many hours searching for balls, almost as long as the whackers do searching for their golf balls. Our family was fortunate because Annie was physical director of adjoining town, Malvern, and when she ordered new equipment, we got the old. We were very popular because of that. The neighborhood could always count on us to have some sort of ball or other. Our teachers were excellent and kind. In the 7th grade, we studied New York State. And I think that's where I got my interest in civics and the American Indian. In 5th grade, World War II started, it was a difficult time for everyone, but a little more so for my family. My father's war really started in 1939 because he was a part of the Lend-Lease program to Great Britain and Murmansk. We were also in a vulnerable spot. If you look at Long Island, we're hanging out there, and we were afraid of spies landing. And of course, we were young kids, so we had a lot of imagination about that, you know, of how they were going to come underground. I mean, unrealistic kind of things. I remember air raids and being terrified, walking to beaches and seeing tar being washed up on the shore, sometimes parts of sailors' uniforms. My father was torpedoed in April of 1941, and he was transporting crude oil from Venezuela to the islands of Aruba and Curacao. He was missing for 2 weeks, and then he landed on an island called Blanquilla. Of course, they had to escape with rowboats, but we heard a lot of the sailors credit him with saving their lives. He was first mate at the time, and the captain didn't want to leave the ship after the first torpedo struck, but Dad convinced him that they had to get into the lifeboats to get away, because if there was one torpedo, there was going to be another. It was hard. Let's see. In high school was probably the most unhappy time of my life. Basically, girls had to dumb down, and that wasn't my style. I didn't enjoy making fun of people, and I didn't like to smoke or drink, and I just didn't, I wanted to talk about more serious things. Luckily, we had a myriad of other activities in which I could participate. Field hockey in the fall, basketball in the winter, softball in the spring, and modern dance all year long. Our gym teacher took from Martha Graham, who was the mother of modern dance. And so we had an extensive program, and we had a wonderful program in modern dance. We had band, orchestra, marching band, and an auditorium that was worthy of Broadway. It had a thrust stage. It had inclined seats, a balcony, a pit for the orchestra. I mean, I'm talking about the real thing. It was really excellent. It was so much fun. The teachers were demanding, interesting, and excellent. Sterling and I started dating in the fall of our senior year. He walked me home from Honor Society meeting slowly, and when we got to the door, I wanted him to kiss me goodnight, and he did. Our first date was December 23rd, 1948, and we went sledding at Bethpage State Park. From that time on, he was my best friend. I remember one instant that, looking back, was basic to our relationship. We were studying Ibsen's Doll House, and I remember telling him, if we ever married, this is at 17, but you know, people did get married then at that time. That was not uncommon. A lot of my girlfriends did do that. That I wasn't going to live in a dollhouse. When we graduated, in their yearbook, Sterling was voted the most sophisticated, which he didn't like. And I, the most dragged with the faculty, which I hated at the time. But now I'm proud of it because I realized asking questions was the best way for me to learn. And I somehow knew that, and I had the desire to keep learning, which I've had all my life, obviously. I've always collected sayings that help me get through difficult periods of my life. During the formative years, it was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Very basic. And forgive them, they know not what they do. These were helpful in dealing with my sisters and others. Sterling and I spent the summer together, and then we went off to college. And we had a discussion about an article I read in some magazine. I don't know where it was. The image was of a bird held tightly, it is crushed, held with an open hand. It is free to grow and return at will. It was both an important concept to both of us. So we went off to college. Sterling to Amherst on a student athlete scholarship, and I went to the University of New Hampshire to study occupational therapy. We dated others, but without much enthusiasm. We were pinned. We was a Beta Theta Pi at the end of our sophomore year, engaged in our junior year. And unlike most of our friends, we didn't get married in June of our senior year. Sterling went off to Columbia Law School for 3 years, and I started my year in clinical training. 3 months each at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City, that was pediatrics, Topeka State Mental Hospital in Kansas, then Brigham in Boston, and finally Montefiore Hospital in New Jersey. When I came home from Kansas, we decided on Christmas Day that we'd get married. Sterling had come over. He only lived 2 blocks away from me. Okay, so, but he came over to spend Christmas morning, and one of the presents I had been given was a beautiful bathrobe. And somebody said, it's almost beautiful for a honeymoon. And so we said, why not? And 4 days later, we got married. Another motivation was that he was to be best man in his good friend's wedding in upstate New York. And at that time, nice girls didn't travel with men unless they were married. We had a small wedding, just the family. And I was lucky. After we came back from Tony's wedding, I went to continue my clinical training at Robert Brigham, and Sterling went back to law school. On weekends, I traveled back and forth to Columbia to be with him. When I finished my clinical training, we found an apartment in East 92nd Street, the Jewish section of Brooklyn. It was a long time before we realized that Chanukah was really Hanukkah. We traveled back and forth and was known as the subway scholar. And I started work as an occupational therapist at Brooklyn State Hospital, responsible for the planning and execution of an activity program for about 150 newly admitted and chronic patients. From this experience, I learned optimum emotional distancing, which had an effect on Weave, I think, because he received the most improved student award when he graduated from law school. And I really think that what improved was that I stopped bringing home my patients and discussing them with him, and he had more time to study. At the time, mind-altering drugs, halfway houses, and open-door policy were experimental. The occupational therapy department participated in these pioneering events. but I always knew I liked the counseling aspect of occupational therapy more than I did the activities. However, the concept that through activity, one learns to interact with people has been valuable both to me as a mother and as a counselor. After law school, we decided to move to Rochester, where we accepted a job with the law firm of Nixon, Hargate, Livingston, Doyle. I worked at Rochester State Hospital until Leslie was born. And after that, I was a stay-at-home mom. Leslie was followed by Lisa, Lauren, and David. The most important priorities of my life were always our marriage and our family. I loved being a wife and mother. But it didn't take me long to realize I needed intellectual stimulation outside the home. I became a professional volunteer. It was 1960, and President Kennedy was telling us to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you could do for your country. So I joined the League of Women Voters and became very active. I served as vice president, chairman of the county government committee, unit chairman, judiciary committee member, lobbyist to the county legislature, and was a member of the Richardson Committee on County Reorganization. We did make a difference, and it was important. And also, it took an awful lot of time, as Sue Schwartz and Nancy Cook know. We changed county government for the better. And in the process, I became more confident. I learned how to do research, speak in public, organize groups, influence people, educate the public, and manipulate the system. Most importantly, I made lifelong friends, among them Claire and Dave Tuttle. I've also volunteered as a docent at the Memorial Art Gallery and learned to discuss visual materials in an imaginative way to a variety of ethnic ages and different interest groups. I preferred children because I could never remember the dates that we were supposed to know. And also, I liked getting them to see, so I would make up stories that would encourage them to look a little bit more carefully. An extra benefit of my own and Weave's increased appreciation of art, which we put to good use in our travels and when we lived in part-time in Washington, D.C. From my experience and from it observing our boys, Lauren and David, I knew that children learn in different ways. So I volunteered to be a Great Books discussion leader for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. You know, your mouth gets dry doing this, just like it does it when you play the trumpet. While seemingly this program would only appeal to good readers, it would also, because of its emphasis on discussion, appeal to intelligent non-readers. And of course, both Weave and I volunteered at the First Unitarian Church. We taught 5th grade Sunday school with Tuttles in Hutchinson House when, at the time, we were moving from our downtown church to Winton Road. We've served as president of the Board of Trustees and was president of the congregation when Bob West was our minister. I served as parliamentarian at the time when the church decided to support FIGHT and Symbolic Sanctuary. And that was because of my experience in the League of Women Voters. I don't remember one single rule right now, but anyway, it was interesting. And we used to have, the congregation made decisions and important decisions as to whether we were going to, as a whole, they made the decisions. And we would have on one side a microphone on one aisle for the pros, and on the other side, a microphone for the cons. And then we'd have a discussion. And there would be a lineup of people to express their point of view, limited to 5 minutes. And it worked out well. And that's how we were able to come to agreement on FIGHT and Symbolic Sanctuary. They were really big decisions. I also served on the Personnel Committee along with Anita Rosenfeld. And we selected Mr. T, the custodian, who was Carl Tishner's father, and Wynn Krebs as our finance person. And they both lasted a long time. I served on the pulpit committee with Sue Schwartz that selected Dick Gilbert. I felt that was one of our best contributions to the Unitarian Church. I was in the dance choir, and just recently I heard from my son that he was a teenager at the time, that he was kind of embarrassed about it, but I never felt uncomfortable dancing in front of 500 people at Christmas and Easter services. It was like singing in the choir. You don't think of that. You think of it as a joyful gift to the congregation. And also I was chairman of the Human Sexuality Committee, and with Dick Fullerton and Dave Stewart, we developed a program for adolescents and their parents. At this time in the 1960s, there was a revolution that most people don't talk about or don't remember. But the advent and availability of the pill made it possible for women, obviously, to control, but it freed people to talk about sex. And one of the things was, it was difficult to talk about sex. People didn't even know words of the parts of their body. I mean, it was repressed, it really was. This was much needed. And I think that it was probably the basis of, it was the beginning of the OWL program, which is so important. In all of these endeavors, I always felt I got more out of it than what I gave. Lifelong friends, new ideas and interests. And through Joyce and Dick, we met Kati, our French friend, who was an important part of our lives. And we felt we had an international family. We kept in touch with all of our family and her till this very day. The church gave direction to our lives. It was a place of refuge. And when there were difficult times, a source of inspiration. When our children started college and more time was available to me, I realized I would enjoy working with people on an individual basis. And I thought about going to graduate school in counseling, but decided to test my competency and interests first. Planned Parenthood offered me that opportunity. I started as a volunteer and then was asked to be on the paid staff, a position I held for 8 years. Our counseling program was truly unique. It consisted of 6 paid staff and 30 volunteers, most of whom had social work degrees. To become a volunteer required a commitment of a lot of training in counseling skills. 12 weeks was just the beginning, and then constant workshops and seminars. I came across a summary of those seminars, which I'd like to share with you because I think that it illustrates how far ahead of the times this program was. We not only had the usual rape crisis, infertility, unwanted pregnancy kind of thing, we also had assessing the sexually dysfunctional couple, homosexuality, prostitution, the alcoholic family and its impact on the system, on the family system. Herpes was rampant at the time, so we learned about herpes and I ran some herpes support groups. Male sexuality, helping parents communicate. As I said, parents really had a hard time talking about sex with their kids. Black, Hispanic couples, teaching parents skills, stress management, empowering parents of adolescents, AIDS, adult learning style, and dealing with loss. Most of those things weren't talked about at that time. In addition to going to these seminars and a volunteer, we'd have a tape. We'd tape volunteer client interviews, of course, with their permission, so we could critique the volunteers' counseling skills and sensitivity. I think one of the most interesting things to me was the depth of Ellen Taves, who was our director, her knowledge and her willingness to share all these things and to see that we had all these things at our fingertips. But was her attitude toward volunteering. It was empowering. She said, don't ever say, I'm just a volunteer. Say, I work at Planned Parenthood. And I think that that brings up another period of time that I'm happy that I lived through, which was the changing role of women. At that time, women were supposed to just stay home and be homemakers. And then things changed, and you were really criticized for being a homemaker and staying home. What kind of job do you have? How come you're not working? So I thought that was really a good saying, that I'm not, and people would say, when at cocktail parties, oh, I'm just a homemaker. Well, no, there's more to it. But I like that attitude toward working. By the time Planned Parenthood came to an end, which was in 1988, Gannett Company moved to Washington, D.C. and started USA Today. We've looked at his calendar and found that one half of his time was spent with the executives of Gannett, and the other half with Bausch & Lomb, RG&E, Xerox in Rochester. Nixon Hargrave wanted him to go to DC part-time. They agreed to pay for our housing and my air flight, which was a nice deal. If we lived in Washington 1/2 a week and Rochester in the other half. That was a compromise they made because I know we wouldn't have done it if he wouldn't have been with his family. What was supposed to be a 3-year commitment turned out to be 10. And I spent the first year choosing a place to live and setting it up. And then in the second year, I decided to go back to get my master's degree in clinical social work. And I did that for 2 years, part of the 2 years. After that, I continued to work as a volunteer home at the center. I was a counselor in the Center for Dispute Settlement, and I ran a program with at Park Ridge for divorced families. I had gotten into the effect of divorce on children. It was a wonderful program at Park Ridge, and the single parents, the mothers could come with their children. So the mothers would have a group, and the children would have age-appropriate groups. It really was an excellent program because it made it easy for them to talk about the effects of divorce on their family. And so let's see where I am. Well, I don't know how, there's not much time, but if you have some questions that you wanted to ask me, I'd like to answer them.
You haven't talked at all about New Horizons, which I happen to know is an important part of your life.
Well, that's happened after we moved back here. I didn't talk, I ran out of time on this thing. Yeah, I did want to just say one other thing, but I can't find it, so I guess I'm not going to say it. Yeah. Well, New Horizons was an important part of my life. I started in 1998, and just did it casually. A friend of mine, a tennis player, was playing the flute, had suggested it. I don't know if any of you knew Bob Evans, Bill Evans. He was a member of our church, and he and Carol Evans had asked me to join before that, but we were in Washington part-time, so I couldn't do it. And so when we came home and we retired, we each found activities to do, and mine was New Horizons. It was a wonderful program. It was started by Roy Ernst, and it's through the Eastman Community Music School. It started with like 25 people. He had put an ad in the newspaper for people asking if older people over 55, were interested in it. He had watched his parents, friends retire and sit in front of the television and die. And he thought there must be more to life than that. That there wasn't too much available for men, especially, and the people that exist in the band, the group members, there's more men than women. But so he started it. He felt that older people could learn. At the time, people didn't think that. And it is now a program of over 200 New Horizons across the United States. And it's an international organization. And there again, I volunteered, had fun. and met so many good friends, especially the trumpet section. And had so many experiences. I mean, yeah, you can't believe I have played for world-renowned conductors because we're connected with the Eastman School. Christopher Seaman would come and conduct us, Jeff Tyzik. We had the opportunity to play in Kilbourne Hall and to play in the Kodak Hall. It's been amazing. Amazing. And now we're doing smart music and with Zoom, which is a program that we look at. Nobody can hear you, thank goodness, because I lost my skills over this period of time. But it keeps us together, and it's fun.